Hey everybody, welcome into this edition of Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. I'm your co-host Mark Killian. Let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome into this edition of Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Once again, joined with Phil Putney. I'm Mark Killian. What's going on, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing great, Mark. Glad to get back at it again. So, yep.
Rocking and rolling, plugging away.
Yep. Back in the saddle.
making the retirement dreams come true, so to speak.
That's right.
Well, good. Well, so we've got a little bit of I guess you maybe could say a downer conversation today, but it's an important one. So, in your line of work, what you do, it's inevitable. I mean, it's inevitable in life that we are going to lose a loved one, right? I mean, it happens. One of us is going to go before the other. And in what you do, it's par for the course. It's the nature of the beast. It's you deal with this quite often because clientele base, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's something we actually plan for when we're doing a financial plan, is run scenarios, part of our, what we call stress testing the plan.
Yep.
What happens when that happens, and what happens if somebody passes early.
Yeah.
Because that's usually where it's more detrimental to a plan and a surviving spouse than if it happens kind of a normal life event.
Yeah.
Later in life. So,
and it's not fun. It's not pleasant to want to talk about or think about. But if you take a little time ahead of time to deal with the fact that it is part of life, and you set a few things in motion, you can certainly make that transition much easier on the surviving spouse. So, as we know, again, the mortality rates are what they are. No one's getting out of here alive. We're all going to pass away at some point.
Right.
So, kind of take the onus to say, look, it's not pleasant, but let's have that chat. Let's get a little planning done. So today's topic is going to be the difficulty of financial planning after the loss of a spouse versus, ahead of time. So I've got a few things here for you. I just kind of want to run past you and just kind of get your take. Now, through your many years of doing this, if somebody has come into you, not a client, maybe a prospective client, and they've already lost a spouse or just recently, what is typically on their, not on an emotional standpoint, a financial, what's the biggest concern usually when you've encountered that?
It kind of depends on what their role has been in the finances. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of spouses aren't involved, especially not to be, too stereotypical in that, but I mean, usually the male is the one that handles the finances. Maybe the female does. I mean, it's our household. My wife doesn't understand the finances, doesn't really want to.
Right.
Other than, is there enough money in the bank to do what she wants and that kind of thing.
And it's Murphy's Law, I would imagine, too. It almost always seems like the person who does pass away first is the one who handled the stuff, be it man or woman.
Usually it's the case. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. So, but yes, I mean, that's the number one concern is, okay, well, I don't even understand this. What's going on?
Right.
I was just used to, doing what we needed to do, spending the money, it was theirs. So,
right. So they're already in an emotional state. And they're already behind the eight ball because they're not understanding what's going on. So hopefully today's podcast will kind of give us some things to think about to not be, to not put somebody in that position, especially obviously someone we love and care about. So when a spouse passes on, what are some immediate challenges, Phil, that the remaining spouse is left to deal with? Give us a few bullet point items that we could consider.
I mean, the first one is there's always going to be a loss of income, and that's just an absolute given. First of all, from Social Security. I mean, the fact of Social Security is, so whichever one's higher, whether it was their own or whether it was the spouse that passed, they retain their benefit. But if they get that benefit, they lose theirs.
Right.
So they were, as a household, a couple together before, had two benefits. At the end, there's only one. It's the highest. So there's going to be a loss. If they're pretty equal in earnings and Social Security, it could be half of the Social Security benefits gone.
And that's pretty sizable. And I think most of us, I think we realize that, but until it actually happens, I think we know it. Like in our mind, we know that's going to come down the pike. But then we don't do some steps to prepare for it. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I'm short a lot of money. Now what?
Right. Or pensions is another thing, looking at that pension option when you're first making the election, if you haven't worked with somebody in financial planning and run the numbers, it's pretty tempting to say, well, I think I'm going to take the bigger number. Oh, we're going to live a long time. And if it plays out that way, that's great. But what happens if, and that's like we talked in the beginning, we run these kind of stress tests with clients when we've done a financial plan obviously the planning in the beginning is planning as though live full life expectancies, everything
Right.
plays out like we would hope.
Right.
But then what happens if it doesn't? What if one of these events happens with one of the spouses passing, so you can see, is there a need for life insurance? And that's one of those kind of overlooked pieces of retirement. Most people think, oh, I'm in retirement, I don't need life insurance anymore. That's back when I had a mortgage and kids were in school.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not necessarily the case. There's oftentimes, at least for a period of time, and we run a stress test showing, okay, if somebody passes today or 5 years or 10 or 15 years down the road, what is that need?
Right. And it may or may not be needed in your particular situation, but every
Absolutely.
situation is different. That's why you do it.
Yep.
Another place I think, Phil, that people really overlook it, and again, it's kind of common sense, but you're in an emotional state and also just habit, is taxes. You've been married 30, 40 years and you're filing married jointly, right? And you lose a spouse and it's not something you're thinking about, but the next go around, you're in a different tax bracket.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's what we call the widow's penalty, so to speak, because oftentimes, again, when we're running a plan and doing the math out with a married couple at a higher level of income, a surviving spouse, even though the income is dropped, oftentimes gets pushed into a higher bracket.
Right.
But you're thinking, well, how can that be? How is that fair? And
right.
I mean, we have the same tax brackets, but the challenge is as a single, those brackets now get cut in half.
Yeah.
So even with a lower income, that surviving spouse gets pushed into the higher bracket. And it's half in the lower brackets. I mean, it's not quite half, you get to the upper brackets, but that's kind of the concept. So,
right. No.
So there's nothing fair about the IRS code. That's just kind of how it plays out.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking about that line you said. I was like, there's, how is that fair? And I'm sure people definitely feel that way. And it's like, it's the tax code.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I often mention this in a class or with clients too, but I'll never forget going through my master's of tax program. I think it was even the first class. The professor got up and said, let me tell you something right now. He says, when we're going through this, he says, the only place you're going to find fair in the entire IRS code is in fair market value, because there's nothing fair about it. So,
right. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty heavy. So again, two major places that, again, we know about, and I think we even expect it, but we don't really plan accordingly. Then it hits us and it can put us in a tailspin. And that's the last place you want to be when you're already an emotional wreck. So
correct.
A little planning really can go a long way ahead of time. A little uncomfortable conversation with one another and your advisor can really kind of hopefully make that transition much easier on the person left behind.
Yes.
Some other places, will trusts, making sure that's
just having all the proper documents in place, wills, trusts, and beneficiary designations. I mean, there's all sorts of horror stories and things weren't done right, especially if there was marriage later in life, or if this is a second marriage where, oops, I, left my ex-spouse as my beneficiary on my pension or my company 401k plan. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the designation on those plans rules. It doesn't matter what your trust says or your will or what you wanted. If you didn't make that change before you passed, that X now has whatever the pension was or the 401k. So you have to be very careful in making sure all those pieces are in place. And that's part of financial planning is
exactly
one of the things to check off. Okay, do we have structured or all the different documents legally structured to make happen what you want to have happen?
Well, kind of check off. That's a good point. Do you guys have like kind of a list, if you will, or kind of a one pager or some things that a lot of times you can give people to go through to kind of look at some of these things ahead of time? I know a lot of advisors do different little things like that to kind of say, here's some items that we should be working on or working towards, or here's some things I need you to pull together.
Yeah, we absolutely. We have, as we're starting the planning process, that list of here's what we need and, the different aspects that we'll talk about as we go through it. So,
okay. Yeah. Yep. And I think that could go a long way. And again, a lot of times you can get these documents from your advisor. You can say, hey, you have a little checklist we can go through on some things we want to do when it comes to, planning for, like today's topic, when one of us passes. Another place to insurance claims. And I guess part of this too, Phil, is when a person does pass and the spouse, the leftover person there is trying to figure out how to deal with it, time is sometimes a factor and others not, right? So
Yep.
sometimes you have to make some decisions quickly and other ones you can take some time with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pieces that play into this, and having the documents together makes it a whole lot easier. We actually, as part of our financial planning process, put together what we call our family estate organizer binder, which is really a binder that brings together not only the financial plan, but a lot of these pieces in place to help that surviving spouse answer the question, okay, where's the insurance policies? Well, that's under this tab. Tab 5 has everything with life insurance in it. Pension, Social Security, well, that's under tab 4. We know everything that's in there. So if there was a pension election made, here it is. We know what it is. So it's just having that documentation brought together up front, organized, reviewed each year to make sure everything that's, changed and updated is in there, makes it a whole lot easier, and speaking of kind of life insurance claims and that aspect, another piece is, how am I going to pay for the funeral? And that's one of those things that, you might have a lot of money, but if it's not titled the right way and a spouse, or if it's now the second spouse has passed, the kids have to figure out, well, how am I going to pay for the funeral? I might be beneficiary on different things, but it takes weeks to months to get all that in place where the funeral home doesn't wait. They want their money today because the funeral is happening. So you have to understand and put those assets in place to make sure things are covered. And I mean, like you said, that's not the time you want a surviving spouse or a child to be thinking about, oh, how am I going to pay for this?
Right.
They're mourning a loss.
And mentioning the child aspect of that, and hopefully in the way we'd like it to happen, one of us passes on, we've had a nice long life, our children are fully grown, kind of thing. And often they probably help mom or dad, whoever's left behind, with some of that. So they're coming in as a third party, and they probably aren't really privy to a lot of the information. So having it all together and organized and having some things really makes your job easier as well, or advisor's job, so that you can say, look, here's all the stuff, so that all the parties can be brought up to speed.
Yeah. And I mean, again, depending on the client, we recommend, bringing in the children at some point and
the executor,
letting them know, hey, this is kind of what's going on. These are the documents we have in place. This is what we'd like to have happen.
Right.
So that they're not getting blindsided later on, and at least knowing, okay, well, mom and dad does have a plan and it's in place, and, not how much am I going to get, but kind of what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
Just to make it easier to help a surviving spouse, or, when both have passed, what does that look like? What has to be taken care of?
Well, because often, when we do lose the spouse, obviously there's all the emotional state that we're going through. And so it's really going to be that time when your mind is not firing as sharply as it should.
Absolutely.
So again, a little bit of time, a little bit of prep time can really make a huge difference, especially on the person that you leave behind. So I would definitely say this: if you're in a situation where, Phil even brought up his own, where one person's just not interested in that sort of thing too much, do them the favor, take the time, get with an advisor, work with them, put something in place, and at least let them know here's who you call. Here's what you do when X happens, so that you can get through that and not make a mistake that may come back to bite them later because you're in an emotional state. So not pleasant, not a lot of fun, but certainly valuable information to share and do when it comes to working with an advisor. And so, as always, folks, if you've got questions, you need help, someone who's struggling in this arena, have them call Phil at 248-888-7530. That's 248-888-7530. Don't forget to go to the website, philstaxhacks.com. And, of course, you can find a lot of good information there. You can check on our past episodes. You can link to his Facebook, lots of different things there. You can subscribe to the podcast while you're there on Apple or Google or Spotify or whatever the case might be. And you can submit an email question to us, and we're going to finish up our show this week with that. So we'll jump in. So, if you have any questions when it comes to the loss of a spouse or how to plan for that, definitely talk with your advisor or reach out to Phil. And let's see what we got. We've got Rourke. And where was Rourke at? Rourke was over in Plymouth. And Rourke says, my financial advisor, Phil, seems to do a good job of managing my investments, as far as I can tell. But we never really talk about things like Social Security, life insurance, or even a legacy plan, which are things I think are pretty important and I'd like to get some advice on. Is this typical? It feels weird.
Yeah, I mean, Rourke, unfortunately it is. I mean, there's, think of it like phases of life you go through, even for your doctors, right? I mean, the doctors you had when you were younger and healthy are probably different than what you have now as you start to age, and maybe you've got a cardiologist, or you're seeing
right,
other doctors that for other different needs that you have. So same thing happens with financial advisors. I mean, a lot of advisors are more focused on just the assets, the investments, the accumulation of. The plan aspect of it doesn't really come into play as much then, although it should technically. But I mean, it's not quite as important then, because you're accumulating. As long as you're saving the right amount, not touching the money, have a plan of how much you need to save. But on the other end, when you start to look at retirement, there's a lot of pieces that play into it: Social Security and pensions and legacy and taxes, and all those things have to come together. So it probably is a good time to get a second opinion of, what are some of these options that I should be looking at, and how does that all fit together?
Well, and again, Phil, we've talked about it before. There's a difference in the types of specialities, if you will, of an advisor. So it sounds as though Roark might be working with more of a broker or just a straight up financial advisor versus a retirement planner.
Right.
And they may do those things as well, but if they're not engaging you in the conversation, then it may not be their forte. It may not be really what they feel strong at. Get a second opinion.
I mean, if they're not bringing up these topics, it's obviously something they don't work with or they're not comfortable with.
Right.
So,
and if it's important to you,
and it's even if it's not important to you, it should be, because these are some pretty vital pieces of your retirement. Right. So,
well, we know it's important to Roark because he
right. Yeah, exactly.
So, if it's important to you, then get a second opinion. I mean, even get a third opinion. We've talked many times on the show. We've been doing the podcast now for quite a while in audio form, and now we're of course doing the video side as well. But there's nothing wrong with meeting with a couple of advisors to find who kind of gives you the warm fuzzies, along with has the credentials and all the pieces that just kind of come together. It's kind of like finding that, that one person you really like that cuts your hair really well. You might go through a few barbers or stylists before you find that person that you always go to, because a rapport and a conversation and that comfort level also plays into it. Into our topic today. When you lost a spouse, knowing that you've had a bit of a relationship with an advisor for a couple of years leading up to that, I'd imagine that's got to make it a lot easier.
It makes it a lot easier on a surviving spouse if there's this third-party relationship in place, because, and I've had this actually happen this year, where we had just finished planning, obviously not part of the plan for the one spouse to pass away early, but it did.
Right.
But the fact that we had done the planning, counted on this, they were going to be okay. The surviving spouse, she knows she's fine, but having a plan in place makes all the difference in the world. There's still all the emotional aspects, but at least okay, we've covered this and we're going to be okay.
Yeah. And those relationships can go a long way. So with that said, that's going to be our topic this week. So, again, not the most fun conversation to have, but very, very vital. And hopefully you learned a little something here on today's podcast. So do us a favor, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube, ring the bell to get notifications. Also, on Facebook, hit the like button, whatever the case might be. You can find all of that at philstaxhacks.com. I'll have that up on the screen, philstaxhacks.com, or you can call 248-888-7530. Before you take action, you should always check with a qualified professional like Phil. We'll talk to you next time, folks, here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with Phil Putney, CPA and personal financial specialist at AFS Wealth Management. We'll see you next time.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.